Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're visiting with James D. Woodford, author of Heaven, An Unexpected Journey, one man's experience with heaven, angels, and the afterlife, brought to us by our good friends at Destiny Image Publishing. Jim, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Eric. Nice to be with you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, you're very welcome. Jim was born in rugged Newfoundland, Canada, became one of the youngest licensed pilots in Canada, eventually traveling over the world as captain of a jetliner. Living in New Brunswick, Canada with his wife Lorraine, he travels throughout North America, encouraging others with his experience in heaven, recounting the face and the gracious love of Jesus Christ. Now, Jim, you weren't always this evangelist, sharing your story. As a matter of fact, you came from very humble beginnings. And although raised in a church environment, how did you define yourself at that time?
Well, I guess when you say humble beginnings, I mean, I come from a very small town in Newfoundland, Canada, as you said. And but you know, like all of us who grow up, whether it's a small town or a large town, it was my home and I loved it. But one of the blessings, I guess, at the time was, and I'm almost 70 years old now, I'll be 70 in January, but back in the 50s and 60s, getting around in the Northeast and the North, of course, a lot of it was done by a small float plane and ski planes in the winter. And so in the remote area that I grew up, it was a frequent sight to see aircraft doing those kinds of operations. And like I think any young boy or girl, you're fascinated by aircraft. And I was fortunate enough to get to know some of the pilots and to be able to be around them at a very early age. And I mean, when I was 8 or 9 years old, I was carrying luggage and sweeping out aircraft and helping to lug the refilling hose. And so at a very early age, I fell in love with aviation.
Now, you grew up in a not a high education or high income home, but yet your mom, your mom was very faithful and sent you to school in a faith-based community, but you didn't really embrace the faith like she did you?
Well, my dad died when I was 2 years old, and my mother, bless her heart, was left with 2 little boys, and she was barely 21 years old. And when I wanted to find love, I look at my mother, because in those days there was very little in the ways of a social safety net for young mothers, and but thanks to the goodness of my paternal grandparents, and they were Catholic, and so I was raised in a, you know, I had nothing traumatic other than the death of my dad, but I was 2 years old. I of course didn't remember it, and I grew up in a very loving, warm, comfortable environment. Nothing traumatic, but I think like most kids, you know, church isn't the first thing on your agenda. And although my grandparents, my mom, were wonderful people, I never had this close relationship with God. And as a matter of fact, as I grew older and became technically oriented as a pilot, to me, unless I could read it in a technical manual, it simply didn't exist. And I'm ashamed to say it now, Eric, but I actually thought that people that depended upon religion relied upon a crutch, and how wrong I was.
You know, it's an interesting perspective. I think that it's not unusual, Jim, that you would feel that way. I grew up in the synagogue, and there wasn't a lot of talk about God in the synagogue. There was a lot of talk about the rabbis and the sages of old, but you know, you talked about Moses, but you didn't talk about God. You talked about Jeremiah, but you didn't talk about God. You talked about Isaiah, but you didn't talk about God. And so I grew up in that kind of environment where it was about the social aspects of contributing to society, being a good person, being benevolent, acts of charity, works, and those kind of things, and supporting the, you know, I grew up in the 50s, so supporting Russian Jews coming to America and the focus on rebuilding the decimated community of our Jewish population in Eastern Europe. And so that was quite a focal point. So I didn't come to faith and really become, and although I was a synagogue attender and I studied at 44 years old when I had my experience. So I think that there's a lot of that, and the older that we get, the more open we are to recognizing supernatural encounters. And certainly your story is one of a supernatural encounter, but you went on to a flying career. So you started out being kind of a ramp tramp and went from the ramp to behind the oak.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, like any job, you start at the bottom and you work your way up. And so my mom, although we had very modest means, bless her heart, she knew the longing in her son's heart, as most mothers do. And somehow, on a secretarial salary, she managed to borrow the money to send me to flying school. And I was able to pay her back within 2 years, so I was very proud of that. But, you know, I look back now, Eric, and I realize now, in the clear view of hindsight, that God's hand was on me even then. I mean, I didn't know it. I didn't look for it. I didn't, and probably would not have accepted it. But as I went on with my career and advancement was fairly, I mean, we're talking about flying in an environment where GPS didn't exist. There were no cell phones, very remote airports, very remote lakes that we landed on. So, I mean, I came in on the tail end of the true bush flying. Mm-hmm. And I was privileged to meet some of those really early pioneers who were at the end of their career as pilots, those that had survived. And so I look back now, and having come up through the bush and started in small aircraft and worked my way up to the Beaver, and then the Otter, and then a stint at water bombing. And eventually I got my jet rating, and which I paid for myself in the hopes of landing a career with a major airline. And then eventually got an opportunity in Europe, and I had a really interesting career. I guess I don't look at it that way. But people say to me, you've led a very interesting life. And to me, I guess it was just what I did for a living. But if you're fortunate enough in life to do something that you truly enjoy every day, then you are really blessed. And I loved every second of it. I mean, I was always on call. I was the guy that volunteered on weekends and Christmas to do any of the fill-in jobs that were needed, because I just loved. And the result of that was I got to fly some really unique aircraft. And, you know, I have ratings on over 44 different types of aircraft, whether it's floats, skis, or jet rated, so, and props. And so I came up through a time, and I guess when I got my license, it was the time of the Vietnam War, and many of the U.S. pilots were in the military. And so the senior pilots in Canada gravitated toward the U.S. to fill those vacancies, and that left the Bush divisions very short of young pilots. And I remember standing at the doorway of the Beaver and watching people look at me, because here was someone that was about to take them into the wilderness, and I wasn't old enough to shave. So I can understand their trepidation.
You know, it's interesting to hear you talk about flying. I took a stint at getting my pilot's license, but I was in a Cessna 152, and
yeah.
I was doing a bunch of touch and goes at an airport outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And on one of my approaches, I got caught by a crosswind of about 35 miles an hour, and that little 152 just blew sideways over the hangar. Just, I mean, literally sideways. You've been there. And I thought to myself, you know, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do. I can hit the throttle and I can try to barrel through it, but there's really, truly, I'm in this 1,000-pound coffin with a lawnmower engine, and the laws of nature are all against me. And I said, this is not for me.
I think the best description of flying I've ever heard, and I don't know who to attribute this to, it was quoted to me, but this captain who we referred to as an old eagle, I mean, he had more time in the air than an eagle. And he said, he said, aviation is best described as thousands of hours of absolute boredom interrupted by moments of stark terror.
It's so true. I thought that there was going to be this amazing thrill of getting up there, doing all my solos and logging my hours and I was in that period of time where I got to sign off for solo, and so I would take the plane and I would go out over Stone Mountain and I would go up over Lake Lanier and you know what? The first time it was amazingly fabulous. The second time was, now I'm aware of wind and cloud formations and weather report. And the next time is, I wonder how many idiots have taken this same plane that I'm renting. And although I did my checklist, I didn't look at the maintenance logs. I didn't check to see when the last time this thing was serviced. All I did was my checklist. So I'm checking to see if there's fuel, if there's oil. I'm not checking to see if this thing was even maintained. I don't know how many hours are on this engine. Now I'm starting to question the logic and the reason behind this. And I'm saying, this is not a lawnmower. It's a lawnmower engine. It's just not a lawnmower. And I'm not on the ground. And then I began to say, this is not thrilling. So maybe I'll do some nighttime stuff. So I would go up at night. And I still did the same thing. I was still navigating on the interstate highway. Still navigating on the interstate. If I make a right turn, it's because I'm following a highway. And so you have to navigate by interstates. And so I share that feeling that once the thrill wore off, which was just a couple of times, now logic begins to set in and you're defying gravity. And I realized this is not for me.
I think that anyone that has become a pilot has at one time or another shared the feelings that you just very vividly described. A good mechanic, great ground crew, absolutely necessary. But for me, and I guess, flying in the bush, I mean, you're facing all kinds of weather and blizzards and snowstorms and howling winds and sometimes having to set down on a lake to wait for the weather to clear, or to set down in the middle of the bush and no radio contact. In those days, you had to be aloft or drop a trailing antenna to get in touch with the home base. And so, but it was when you're young, thank God that God, let me put it this way, God is merciful enough that when you're young, He doesn't let you see all the things that could happen to you.
Yeah, maybe I should have done this in my teens and my 20s, because I was doing this in my 40s and 50s, and I was questioning absolutely everything. And then I would see on TV these people with ultralights. They were building them in their backyard, and then they were taking off with them, and they would tow them behind their car, and the wings were retractable. And I'm thinking to myself, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? Buy a ticket. If you need the money, I will buy you a ticket. And so there's people who have that adventurous spirit, who like the adrenaline, and I'm not one of them.
I think you may be right in your comment a few moments ago that taking it up in your 40s is a lot more difficult than taking it up when you're 18 or 19. At 18 and 19, you're blissfully stupid, and you don't have the responsibilities that you would have later in life, and so you don't tend to think of the things that could. Well, you think of them, but you don't imagine them to the extent that you do when you have those family responsibilities. And so, I was blissfully ignorant, but man, I was happy.
Yes, I can see that, and I read that, and your writing captured the enthusiasm of your youth and the excitement and the accomplishment and the places that you saw and the things that you did. I remember I got on my first flight, I think it was in 1957. So you remember that you got a 3-pack of cigarettes. I was 5 years old. I got a 3-pack of cigarettes wrapped in a little package, so you could smoke on the planes.
Yeah.
And every seat was outfitted with cigarettes. So,
Oh yeah, yeah.
you know, I was given a 3-pack, I think, of Winston's at the age of 5 when I was being shipped off to summer camp. That was my first. What are they doing? Giving me 5 years old. I'm getting cigarettes.
Yeah.
So you know, just everybody has such unique youth experiences that it's fun to look back on those times with somebody in your peer group, your age group, that can reminisce about this. Now, in order to be a pilot, you had to have physicals every year. So you had to maintain your health. You couldn't.
Absolutely.
You know, today we have a problem with a certain amount of alcoholism, a certain amount of drug use, and I guess they figured out a way to work around it for the physical. But now they do random testing, which kind of keeps you on the straight and narrow. But back in your day, it was what, once a year?
No, for a commercial, what we call an ATR rating, airline transport rating, it was every 6 months, and very rigid. And you know, I went all my life being examined every 6 months, and was blessed with great health. I mean, I never took anything, Eric, stronger than an aspirin all my life. Was blessed with good health, and you know, and I guess it was all being saved up for the last few years.
Right. But when did you first encounter? Because this was kind of the beginning of change in your life that brought about really a debilitating diagnosis. But there were some events that led up to this. Why don't you describe those for us?
You know, as I grew in my career, I made some investments in business and did really well at it, and almost without trying. I became known, my nickname was Diamond Jim. Not only did I survive a few catastrophic events with aircraft, but I managed to, you know, everything I touched seemed to turn to gold. And I had pretty much retired from flying and was concentrating on my manufacturing companies. And in 2009, 2010, I began to feel different. And I mean, I hadn't changed my lifestyle. I still had aircraft to fly, but I was concentrating more on the business side. And I woke up one morning at our cottage, and you know how you maybe unintentionally sleep on your arm or your leg, and the common vernacular is it's gone to sleep.
Right.
Well, I woke up one morning and both arms and both feet felt tingling and as though they were stiff, and I thought at the time, what possible position could I have slept in last night that both hands and both feet felt that way? And within a day or so, it progressed to where I was losing my balance, and for someone that had never been ill, and my wife, bless her heart, she's a nurse. She said, "Jim, this is not, you know, I don't think you need to. I think you need to get to the hospital as soon as possible." So I didn't. I went to my doctor and got an appointment. Went in and saw him, and he looked at me. And in fairness to him, you know, he had never. Most doctors have not been in a position of diagnosing the rare disease that I was coming down with, and he thought I had the flu, and so did I. I went home. A couple of days later, I'm throwing up and loss of balance. I go back in, and he sent me home again and told me to rest and so on. What I didn't realize, Eric, was I was coming down with a disease that has about a 7-day window to arrest. And if it is not properly diagnosed and you do not receive the treatments necessary, then it goes full blown. And so I passed that 7-day window. And then I finally was so ill, I went in and I fell down in the parking lot. And by that time, they knew something serious was wrong. I was admitted to hospital immediately. And eventually, a neurologist came to see me. And he, you know, did his examinations. And And I know that he consulted with someone else that was there. But by this time, I was losing the ability to swallow. I was losing my ability to comprehend. The pain was getting worse. And so to make a long story short, they finally did a lumbar puncture because they thought maybe I was coming down with muscular dystrophy. But I'll never forget it, Eric, when the doctor came back, the specialist, and he said, "James, I'm afraid that you have contracted a rare disease, and it's called Guillain-Barré." Now, we can forgive our listeners if they've not heard of it. Many people haven't. Although, ironically, in these recent days of the Zika virus, they're now finding, particularly in Brazil, that they've had a 30% increase in the number of cases of Guillain-Barré affiliated with the onset of Zika. Mm. But back in 2009, 2010, as I said, you could not fault a doctor for misdiagnosing it because they saw it so rarely. And by the way, it's named after the two French doctors in Paris who first isolated the disease in the 1940s, Dr. Guillain and Dr. Barré. And so I had never heard of it, and he went on to explain to me that it is an autoimmune thing. They're not quite sure what causes it. But in fact, what happens is the myelin sheath on your brainstem becomes eroded. It's as though you stripped away the insulation area from an electric cord, and all the electrical signals are jumbled and going everywhere. And that's what was happening to me. And so it was manifesting in my inability to walk, to talk, to swallow, to it was really debilitating. I mean, I went literally overnight from a guy that jumped horses, had a collection of British sports cars, did all the things, flew aerobatics, flew jets, and I literally overnight went to a guy that couldn't even care for himself.
Now this carried with it some debilitating pain as well. And over the course of time, you found yourself on opioids, on highly narcotic painkillers that caused you to...
That's right. That's right. I got through a long period of being in the hospital. I had to teach myself to walk again. I took months and months of physiotherapy. But what I was left with, Eric, was this debilitating pain. Now, look, I'm not talking about nuisance pain. I'm not talking about inconvenient pain. I'm talking about keeping a leather belt by my bed to bite on, to keep from screaming out in the night and waking my family. I mean, I didn't know pain like that existed. And no matter what I tried, no matter what the doctors prescribed, nothing seemed to help. But it would come in waves. And then it would subside to where I could almost function again. But when it came back worse than ever. And then in my desperation, and I traveled to many, many specialists, I finally met with a pain specialist who prescribed for the very first time, Eric, opioids. Now look, as I said 20 minutes ago, I never took as much as an aspirin in my life. And suddenly I found myself on this medication. And believe me, my heart goes out to anyone with the opioid epidemic we have in North America today, who has a family member or through prescription meds have moved on to something else. Look, I mean, if I never needed that stuff.
Right.
I wanted to get high. I got on my own airplane, went up to 30,000 feet.
Right. Jim, this pain advanced to the point where you finally were able to get a little bit of relief, and there was a day that you were in your truck and you drove it to this overlook and were gripped in pain, and you reached, in your last recollection, your last memory was reaching for the pill bottle. And the thought at the time was, I want to get this pain under control. There was not a thought of ending your life. It was just the pain was so overwhelming. that you ultimately swallowed the contents of the bottle, not really knowing how many were in there at this point. We're talking with Jim Woodford, author of Heaven, An Unexpected Journey, One Man's Experience with Heaven, Angels, and the Afterlife. When we come back, we're going to meet Jim in that cab of that truck as he walks us through the rest of this journey. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere, and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the Heartlines, and Biblical Truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Jim Woodford, author of Heaven, An Unexpected Journey, One Man's Experience with Heaven's Angels and the Afterlife. Jim, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Eric. Good to be back.
Jim, we left the last segment with you sitting in your truck. You were trying to deal with the pain, the overwhelming pain, and it ultimately led to a fatal overdose. Unbeknownst to you, it was not your intention. You were trying to deal with pain. Did you have suicidal thoughts?
Look, at the point, what I remember was I was desperate to do something to stop the pain. Did I want to die? No. But I had learned from taking these opioids and the strange irony of these medications, and I think that's why we have such an epidemic today, is that the more you take, the more you need. And look, you lose rational thought. You truly do. And my heart goes out to people that are caught up in this. But I never, ever thought that what would happen to me would happen. People say to me, well, you must have been reasonably intelligent. Look, you take enough of that medication, and 2 and 2 adds up to 10. I mean, there's just no rational thought. And so I took that medication to try and stop the incredible pain that I was having, because that day was the worst day I had ever had. And I know we're limited for time, but very quickly I'll tell you this. Eric, it's easy to die. Living is hard. But I wanted to live. That day I took that medication, I was trying to kill the pain so I could get out and walk that field, because I was trying to sell it and I needed to look at the markers. But that day was as though all the pain of the previous 3 years had culminated on that day. And yes, I took the medication. And I sat there waiting for this wonderful feeling I had gotten used to, that for 2 or 3 hours I would have some semblance of peace. But instead of that feeling of warmth coming over the ache and pain in my body, suddenly it felt as though my hands and feet were on fire. I knew I was in desperate trouble. I knew I had done something that was catastrophically wrong in the sense that of the medication that I had taken. And of course, what I found out later was your body builds up a toxic effect, and then you just need a certain amount to go over the edge. And that's what happened to me. But to give you a sense of what it's like to die, I felt as though the cab of my truck was filling with water, and I was raising my head to try to gasp for air. I believe with all my heart, Eric, there's 6 words and the prayers of my family and the grace of God that are responsible for me being with you today. And as I drew my last breath, I called out the first 3 of those words. Look, I never really believed in God. I certainly didn't believe in petitioning God. I'd been self-sufficient all my life. But in that last moment, I raised my hand to the setting sun, and it was shaking violently. And I cried out from a part of me that I didn't even know existed. God, forgive me. Not out of fear. I'd faced death a couple of times as a pilot, never flinched. But I had this overwhelming sense that I had wasted this beautiful life that God had given me, and that I could have done so much more with it. I could have helped people with all the resources, all the money I had. Instead, I was totally consumed with the American Canadian dream, the accumulation of wealth and all it could buy. And in this last few seconds of my life, I knew how wrong that was. I fell forward, struck my head on the steering wheel, and I'm gone. I'm not sure how long I was there, but I remember when I sat back up, I knew time had passed because the sun was on the horizon. It had set. But suddenly I became aware that I felt no pain. And in my elation, I slid out of the truck. I walked about 15 feet away. I mean, it's an evening in April 2014. I can smell the green spring grass. I can hear the birds in the trees. But I look down, and it's as though I'm looking through myself. But I thought, that's just the medication. But then I turn, Eric, and I look toward my truck. And I'm filled with rage and indignation because some son of a gun is sitting in my truck. Not only that, he's sleeping on my steering wheel. And I turned in my rage to go over there and give him a good thumping. And you ever had a dream where you're trying to move and your feet won't move? That's what happened. I struggle closer, inch by inch, and then I realize the body in the truck is not some stranger. It is me. The feeling of panic, the feeling of incredible fear that swept through me is indescribable. And suddenly I was filled with this, if I could just get back in my body, everything would be okay. And that's what I struggle to do. But suddenly, Eric, I began to rise. I'm a good judge of altitude. I'm a former pilot. At 1,500 feet, I tilt my head back, I look up, and there it is. This incredible golden circle. And it filled with light, and then it swung inward, not outward. It swung inward. And suddenly, as though I had hit the thrusters on one of the jets I had flown, I went zipping into that incredible tunnel of light. I had never paid any attention to people who described out-of-death experiences, out-of-body experiences or the tunnel of light, but that's exactly what I saw. Tremendous speed, no sensation of wind, just tremendous speed and no sound. Incredibly beautiful, but a brilliant light at the end. In an instant, I'm there. I come upright. I was at about 45-degree angle. I come upright, and there's I still don't know whether to call it an entrance or an exit, but it was filled with mist, and I just knew I had to step through. And as any of us would do, stepping someplace unfamiliar, I put one foot in and felt for the ground, or something solid, and I felt it. I brought my other foot through. I looked down, the mist clears. Eric, I'm standing on the most incredible, beautiful green grass I had ever seen. I now know where the saying comes from. The grass is always greener on the other side. Mm-hmm. They're talking about heaven. They really are. Every blade of grass emitting this beautiful, incredible light. I was entranced by it because every step I took, light rippled out from underneath my feet. I mean, beautiful, incredible. And then I look up, the mist cleared even further, and I'm facing as though someone has drawn a dividing line right in front of me. And to the right, there's this beautiful mist-colored field, as though you got up at 5 o'clock in the morning in the country and you looked out and saw the mist, what pilots call ground effect, laying over the trees, and beautiful flowers peeping through the mist. But to the left, Eric, it was as though the grass went from green to brown to black to scorched to dark, and then it dropped off in a chasm. I look back now and I realize I had lived a life that, although I thought I was a decent guy, I had not lived the life that God had intended for me. And suddenly I was being given a look at either way. And I honestly believe to this day that I was on the knife edge. Look, people say to me, well, how could you have stepped out, seen heaven on one side, hell on the other, hell is below? Look, I'm not a theologist. I don't pretend to be. I don't understand it either. I do know that I was given this glimpse of the darkness and the light. Remember the 6 words that I talked to you about? I cried out first, God help me. The remaining 3 words, and as I looked down on this pit, I saw a light, like a distant campfire, glowing in the darkness. And the sides of this chasm were shiny black, like anthracite or coal. And as I looked down, something emerged, and I heard this incredible sound, as though 2 massive doors on rusty old hinges that had not been opened in a long time, screeching open. And as I peered down into this pit, something came through those doors, Eric, and stared up at me with a look of such hatred, such malevolence, that it just terrified me. But that was just the beginning, because suddenly it started to clamber up the walls of that pit toward me. The hair on the back of my neck stands up as I remember this creature, because it was a shape-shifting form. It had a face that was hideous, Hollywood could not do justice to this. And it reared up out of the pit over me, and I turned from it in fear and absolute a feeling of being distraught, because I could hear screaming coming from within the body of this creature, this amorphous cloud that surrounded it. And then the most hideous thing, I heard my name being called, Eric. My name. This creature knew me. And if a serpent could speak, that's what it was like. It had a hissing quality. Jim, we're here for you. This is your time with us. And in my desperation, I turned toward the light, in that beautiful light that was to the right. And I felt it come up behind me. I could smell the stench of its death and decay and its breath on my neck. And then I cried out. I raised my hands to that beautiful mist, Eric. I cried the next 3 words that I believe were so important. Remember, I called out in my truck, God forgive me. Then I called out, God help me. Instantly, Eric, instantly, 3 points of light like distant stars appeared in that mist, coming so rapidly toward me. I mean, they had all afterburners firing. They came so rapidly and began to take form. And I remember thinking this so clearly. Are these angels? I mean, I wasn't religious, but everyone's gotten a Christmas card. I knew what angels looked like. And suddenly they're coming toward me, and what's advancing ahead of them is this incredible light, and it flooded over me, and when it went beyond me and touched the creature behind me, it shrieked and screamed and scrambled down that hole like a rat running for cover. Eric, darkness and evil cannot exist in the light of God.
Amen.
It can't. And if you have the light of God in your life, nothing can touch you. It can't. And then suddenly I realized that they're there to protect me. God had heard my prayer. I don't know why. I can't explain it. But I know this, that my message, the central core of my message is, it's never too late. Never too late. And God had sent a rescue team to save me. And I'm just so grateful that he did. And I'm sorry I'm rambling, but I get caught up in this, Eric. It is so.
No, it's
part of
Jim, you know, I've heard you give this testimony several times, once with our friend Sid Roth, in front of a group of people. It's always the same, and that's one of the things that I applaud you for, is the consistency and the personal connection with what you experienced. These angels escorted you deeper into the presence of God, and ultimately you came face to face with Jesus.
Yes. I mean,
take me to that encounter.
First, I have to tell you that the sense of peace and love that I had from these creatures, from these beings of God, was so wonderful. And they called me their constant. They said they were my constant friend, and they talked to me with such love and depth. But the amazing thing, Eric, was they bowed to me. I thought at first they were just being polite. No. They see the light of their master in us. The light of God is in each of us. We have just got to recognize it. And now I know how it works. And so they led me through heaven. They showed me so many things, Eric. So many incredible, beautiful things. And eventually, you know, like I said, the 6 words, the prayers of my family. They showed me what I thought were contrails going up in the sky, as though a jet had passed overhead. But these were going straight up, and they were brilliant, and there were 6 of them. I discovered later when I came back that when my wife had been told that I was brain dead and that there was no hope for me, that the family gathered in our kitchen, her sisters, my brothers-in-law, with their arms around each other, and prayed. And David, my brother-in-law, who I always kind of chuckle at because he was such a devout Christian, he led the prayer. And the prayer was that if it be the will of Jesus, that he send Jim back. And then suddenly I look and they point I was looking for the tall angel. I turned, and there was a rise only 30 feet away, and I look, and the tall angel is there, but now he's bowing to someone. And as beautiful as the angels were, Eric, the light from this other figure was entrancing. It behaved like slow-moving water, but it was light, and it flowed from all. It seemed to cascade from his head and down all sides of his body. And as it came down, that sloped toward me and pooled around my feet. Suddenly I was filled with this incredible knowledge that I was looking at none other than Jesus Christ, the Son of God, someone who I had thought was just a legend, someone made up by old men and dusty old books. And now I'm looking at the Son of the living God. I mean, it's indescribable, you know? And I know what people say to me. People doubt it. I understand that. I was the greatest doubter of all. And how could you, Jim, who never went to church, be worthy of this? I don't know. But I do know this. The one person in the Bible that I identify most with is the thief that hung on the cross next to Christ. He had no time to crawl down and go into the synagogue and pray. He had no time to crawl down off that cross and go be baptized in the Jordan River. He had no time to tithe to a church or to do acts of goodness. He just said to Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And I didn't say those words, but I called out to God from a part of me that I didn't even know existed. And he heard me, Eric. I don't understand it.
Jim, you're talking about the faithfulness of God to hear our cry, even in our brokenness, even in our unbelief. As we watch your story unfold, you were delivered what I think you perceived as the most devastating news, that you had to go back.
Yeah, devastating is the word. Look, you're looking at a guy that can't wait to die again. I know that's an odd thing to say, but once you've had this experience, once you've seen what I've seen, I have a lovely wife, I have a beautiful life now, but I can't wait to go back. I truly can't. But I know I can't precipitate it. I have to honor what Jesus said to me. And these are the exact words that Jesus said to me when he turned toward me. And I looked into those eyes of gray and green and blue. I saw the depth of his love for me, for mankind. And then I saw forgiveness for me. And he looked at me. He didn't say a lot. People say to me, didn't he say more? Look, what he said to me will last me 1,000 lifetimes. And he looked at me. And he said, James, my son, this is not yet your time. Go back and tell your brothers and sisters of the wonders we have shown you. And that's all I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to convince anyone to be part of a particular religious sect. I'm just trying to tell people, don't make the mistakes that I made. Don't just brush this off as we do in this age of instantaneous gratification, as some old dusty legend. This place actually exists. It is a world of all worlds, with such a feeling of love and forgiveness and peace. I think it's what God originally wanted this world to be.
Jim, just take a minute and describe your wife to me, because she actually wrote a chapter of your book. And her perspective is the validation and confirmation that the doctor told her you were brain dead, that there was no EEG activity whatsoever, and that the combination of your Guillain-Barré, that your body had completely shut down, combined with the overdose of the opioids, that she actually gives a first-hand testimony of what it was like from her perspective navigating through this news. Is your wife prone to flights of fancy and to exaggeration?
My wife is the most down-to-earth, practical person you could ever hope to meet. She's a nurse, a very good nurse. Look, I don't even know how I convinced her to marry me because she always had a strong faith. I think I may have muttered something about trying to change, but I never did. But I look back now and I realize God put her in my life for a reason. And Lorraine is a very, as I said, very no nonsense kind of person. And she simply is repeating what the physician said to her. You know, that if Jim did recover, he'd be nothing but a vegetable. And so I joke that that's my greatest fear, coming back as a cabbage or broccoli.
Jim, is there any, in recorded medical science, anyone who's been cured of Guillain-Barré?
I don't have empirical knowledge of that, but I do know this, that, I mean, all the signs of it are gone in me. I'm examined every now and then. The elevated proteins in my spinal fluid are still there, but I have none of the effects. And as a matter of fact, Eric, I am filled with such an energy and a sense of purpose that I feel not 69. I feel like I'm 39. You know,
how do the doctors explain you being asymptomatic?
Well, they said to me, we don't know what to call this. We're going to call it spontaneous recovery.
Spontaneous recovery is their term.
That was the term.
Spontaneous recovery. Sounds to me like the power of God.
Well, I know it was. I realize people will doubt it. I realize many will believe it. Because, look, I'm convinced of one thing, Eric. I'm not the only person that's had this experience. And in the 15,000 people I've spoken to, I have people quietly come up to me and say, after the service, and say, Jim, I had a heart attack. I saw Jesus. I saw an angel. I saw my mother. But I just couldn't say anything. And the saddest thing of all was a man who said to me, I saw Jesus. He spoke to me. But when I tried to describe that to my friends and family, they ridiculed me. I don't care about being ridiculed, Eric. I've lived my life. I've now been sent back with a commission from the God of all gods. And all I'm trying to do is, if you don't accept it, that's fine. But please, don't dismiss it. Think about it. Jesus is real. He is as real as you and I, probably more so. And that's all I'm trying to do, is to make people understand that there is something beyond this life. Many people wake up in the dead of the night with this longing inside of them. Is this all there is? And I've come back to tell you, no. You see, I now know we actually live in the land of the dying. We go to the land of the living. There's the difference. That's the difference.
Well, it's a stunning difference, a staggering difference. As Jim Woodford, James D. Woodford, with Dr. Tom Gardner, have written a book called Heaven, An Unexpected Journey, One Man's Experience with Heaven, Angels, and the Afterlife. As I read this book, I looked at his descriptions, and they are biblical. They line up with Scripture. You'll have to decide for yourself upon the reading of this testimony. But I found in my years that I can't really question anyone's testimony, that we are all overcomers by the word of our testimony and the blood of the Lamb. What I do know about Jim Woodford is he is now someone who was lost, but now he's found. That he's bringing a message that is not consistent with his first 65 years of life. He was not a believer, let alone an evangelist. He was not a man of faith, let alone someone who shares a story of visiting heaven and returning with a message. His wife is a nurse, not prone to exaggeration, but in very clinical terms describes her experience on this side as seeing her husband as being declared brain dead, who now you can see is in full form and function without any signs of decay or debilitation. Questions that there are no answers to, but if you're seeking a deeper understanding of one man's experience as he shares it in quite eloquent terms, I strongly suggest you get yourself a copy and read this story for yourself. I've read it, and I encourage you to read it. Jim Woodford, thank you for being with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you, Eric. I really enjoyed it.
God bless,
bless
you.
you.
God bless you.
Thank you.
And we're going to take a short break, and when we return, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth. We'll be right back.